Okay, Alexander, we've got a situation in Sudan, a coup, and this is unfolding. So, when this video goes live, the situation may change. But right now, you do have a coup. You have military forces have been deployed to the region as well, and civilian movement has been restricted. And the situation is tense. What is going on in Sudan at the moment, Alexander?
Well, the situation is that there's been, as you correctly said, a coup, and this has come after a long period of increasing deterioration in relations between the Sudanese military and its supporters in Sudan, of whom there are many, by the way, and the civilian government, which had established itself over the last few years, which has taken steps against the military, or at least some officials of the military, including the former Sudanese leader, Omar al-Bashir, who was, of course, the Sudanese military leader that the United States and the Western powers sanctioned and whom they want to put on trial for alleged human rights abuses in various parts where the Sudanese military operated in southern Sudan, in Darfur and all those sort of places, in the various wars that took place in Sudan. And of course, the military are very unhappy about this, about the fact that the civilian government seems to have been going along with some of these US Western demands to put people like Bashir and others on trial, because they've been concerned that if that were to happen, then that might lead to more investigations and prosecutions of lower-ranking officials within the Sudanese military. And besides, they also have a feeling, and this has been a widespread sentiment in Sudan anyway, that the Western powers have been using the civilian government to extend their power into Sudan. And who are the Western powers anyway to start making decisions about what goes on in Sudan, in Khartoum, the capital, and, to start dictating the kind of policies that Sudan should be following. Anyway, this crisis has been rumbling through the summer. There have been protests one way or the other. There was apparently something that looked like perhaps a dress rehearsal of a coup a few weeks ago. And now finally, the actual thing has happened. It's not played out. There could very well be civilian protests. The civilian government had its support in Sudan. We could very well see those supporters coming out on the streets. We'll see how the military responds. We'll see if the military even holds together and whether this coup sticks. But it's most likely, I think, that it will. And we will, in that case, I suspect, see Sudan taking steps, or at least the new military leadership of Sudan, taking steps to distance Sudan from the United States and from the Western powers, and realigning increasingly with the East. And there's a sub-story there, which is a very important one, and it involves the Russians.
Yeah, there are reports that civilians are on the streets and they're protesting, but obviously the military is also pushing back against those protests. So once again, we'll see exactly what the situation looks like maybe in a day or two. But as we are recording this video at the moment, there are civilian protests, but they're not having many results right now. So the military coup is holding up at this moment. But the African Union has suspended Sudan's membership in the organization. Macron has come out and has condemned this. The U.S. Embassy is urging for calm. The U.S. Embassy in Khartoum is urging for calm. Alexander, this is this a tilt of Sudan towards Russia and China? Is this the fear from the West? If this military coup holds, are we looking at a realignment for Sudan if it holds? And what if it doesn't hold? Then what does this mean?
I think the first point to make is that, in my opinion, this coup has entirely internal causes. I mean, I don't think that the military leaders who have launched this coup have launched it because they have any particular preference one way or the other on international questions. But the civilian government was increasingly aligned with the West. And from the Western point of view, they will undoubtedly see this coup as a geopolitical loss. And there are factors to play. First of all, if this coup sticks, then of course the chances of getting those prosecutions, all that, all those things done in Sudan, which, to be clear, isn't just a question of, retribution against Sudanese officers. It is a mechanism for completely altering the power balance within Sudan itself. You purge the military of its existing officer corps and, the civilian administration that supported the military when it was in power, of, their civilian administrators. You replace them with a whole new group who are loyal to Sudan's civilian government and its policy of alignment with the West. So all of that is in jeopardy. So that will be seen as a defeat by the West if this coup sticks. But beyond that, there is a power struggle over Sudan which is going on. Now, Africa, for a long period after the Cold War, had become, in effect, a place where the United States was dominated it. It was all kinds of very close relations with many African countries. The United States has developed its own military headquarters in Africa. France was heavily involved in North Africa also. What has happened over the last 10 years is that that's begun to erode, because the Chinese went into Africa. They started investing heavily in parts of Africa. That hasn't always gone especially well, but there is now a very significant Chinese economic footprint in Africa. The Russians have also, in more recent years, become involved. They've sent, as we know, military advisors and mercenaries to the Central African Republic. They're now involved in Mali. This has become increasingly difficult, both for the US and for the Europeans. The Russians are also backing Ethiopia in its war with Tigray, and they're becoming more involved there also. And of course, over the last year or so, the Russians have announced their plan to open a major naval base on the Sudanese coast. And they'd penciled an agreement with the Sudanese government to establish that naval base. Well, unsurprisingly, the Western powers were very hostile to the idea, and over a certain period in the summer, it looked as if the whole idea of this naval base in Sudan, this Russian naval base, had been called off. It turned out that the Sudanese were still going along with it. Apparently, the military wanted it. If the military government, as I said, is able to consolidate its control, it is highly likely that that Russian naval base will be built, and that will, of course, provide the Russian Navy with an access point to the Red Sea and to the Indian Ocean, and ultimately to the Pacific. Now, the Chinese already have a naval base in Djibouti, so that makes for a further complications, if you like, in the geostrategic situation. But there is another factor which I think people underestimate the importance of, which is that, of course, more African countries, Sudan, Mali, Central African Republic, start tilting towards Russia. Angola also is friends with both Russia and China. Ethiopia is friends with Russia and China. Djibouti is friends with China. China is involved in many countries. What that might do, ultimately, is it might start to affect and influence the way these countries vote in the General Assembly of the United Nations. Now, the United States has had majority support in the General Assembly of the United Nations for a long time, ever since the end of the Cold War. And that has enabled it to pack the UN institutions with its own people. And it's also given the United States a solid majority in the UN Security Council. If the African states start to switch, then the United States could potentially lose control of the UN institutions. And though that would take longer, it might find its majority in the UN Security Council begin to erode. Now, that, I think, is something that would concern the United States a great deal, because it would mean that the United States is no longer in the position where it can claim to be, the leader of the international community, as it has been able to do up to now. And I think in that kind of situation, it would appear that, we're back again to the Cold War situation, where there was the Americans and the Soviets had basically equal support in the UN. And that's not something the US wants to see. It would confirm that the unipolar moment is well and truly over. And I think it's something that the Americans will want to prevent at all costs. Africa is the pivot, and you will see, I suspect, a growing struggle for control of more and more African countries. There was a furious row between Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and Josep Borrell, who is the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, just a few weeks ago, in which Borrell told the Russians, stay out of Africa. Africa is ours.
Yeah, Africa is the pivot, and Sudan may be the pivot. Do you think this coup is going to be successful, Alexander? The Prime Minister Hamdok is under house arrest. 4 cabinet ministers as well are under house arrest. No one's sure of their location. There are crowds, as we said earlier, that are calling for power to be restored to a civilian government, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. Is this going to pan out to be a successful coup? Because the Ministry of Communication, let me make sure I got that correct. The Ministry of Information, which is aligned with Hamdok, is still reporting via Facebook that this has been an illegal seizure of power from the military. So, I've always said if a coup's to be successful, you have to make sure you do 2 things, Alexander. Number 1 is you take out the leader, president or prime minister, one way or another, whether that's via murder or assassination or whether that's via house arrest or an arrest, and you make sure you get that leader out of the way. And the second thing that you have to do is you have to squash all forms of communication which were supportive of the government that you just took over. And it looks like this coup has done the first thing, which is they've taken the prime minister and they've put him under house arrest. No one knows where, but it seems that they haven't done the second thing, which is to control all lines of communication. So how are you seeing this play out?
I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on Sudan, but I think the coup I think the coup will probably succeed. The reason I think it will probably succeed is because the army seems to be solid in its backing behind it. And it's also the case that there's been substantial support for the army from Sudanese society. So the army has a degree of popular support. And of course, as in many other places, the economic situation in Sudan has been bad. And of course, there's been criticism of the civilian government and of its handling, both of the economic crisis and of the pandemic situation. So you're not talking about a massively popular government. Now, the coup is clearly a work in progress. I would say one thing, though, which is that, of course, from the point of view of the Sudanese military, it's controlling communications within Sudan itself that is probably more important than controlling a Facebook page, which is more likely to be read by people outside Sudan. So obviously it's still a work in progress. They haven't tied up all the loose ends. I think they probably will succeed in tying them before very long. And I suspect that this thing will stick. I would have thought it looks a well-planned operation. And as I said, the entire army, the entire military is backing it. And so I think on balance it will succeed. But, it may be that I'm wrong about that. I'm not going to claim to be an absolute or expert on these things, but as somebody who's followed coups in many countries, and of course who lived through one in my early childhood, there was a coup when I was a child in Greece, which I had personal experience of, very close personal experience of. This looks to me like a coup that's going to succeed.
Yeah, and if it succeeds, well, we could be looking at a major pivot.
Absolutely,
we could. But for all of Africa, yeah.
We could, because Sudan is an important country in Africa. The African Union, as you rightly say, has opposed this coup. But my own guess is that the Ethiopian government, which has its own issues with the West at the moment, and which hosts the African Union, might quite possibly swing round to support the coup, as the change of power in Sudan too. Anyway, we'll just have to see how things work out.
Yeah. As we said in this video, things are developing. By the minute, by the hour. So
yes.
By the time this video goes up, we'll see what the situation is like and how it's unfolding. So with that said, theduran.locals.com, everybody, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code Real News and look for our videos on BitChute, ODYSEE, Rumble, and Super U. You'll find all those links down below. Take care.